This is BMAC here for podcast 71 of the BMAC, the Blindcaster podcast on YouTube. Again, subscribe. Two more times. Subscribe and subscribe. So, that's something I got to talk to you guys about today. Ladies and gentlemen, if you listen to the show, there's a show called Valuetainment. It's a business podcast. And they talk to all kinds of business leaders, pioneers, interesting cats. And there was one character that I found to be interesting. She was an AIDS scientist in the 80s. Dr. Judy Margulies. She used to work for the NIA, Dr. Fauci, Anthony Fauci. And she recently wrote a book called Plague of Corruption. That book is about the AIDS epidemic in the 80s. So, things I heard in that interview were quite revealing. And one of the things I found interesting is that they had to isolate that virus in the 80s when it was a huge thing. Okay? And what I found really appalling is that Dr. Fauci had lied because they said the virus was isolated, even though it wasn't. They took her to court over speaking out about the virus, and it was pretty sad. And it was quite an interesting narrative that I heard from her. Obviously, YouTube has taken her down because she's too outspoken for YouTube. But luckily, you can get that interview on the podcast called Valuetainment. It's by Patrick Bet-David. He is a Iranian business interviewer that interviewed guys like Samuel Logorano, Carlos Mencia, Stephen A. Smith, and of course, a boxer named Teddy Atlas, who was a boxing trainer and at one point broadcaster for ESPN. He used to call the fights when they would have boxing on ESPN years ago. And give a shout out to a longtime listener. What's up, girl, Catherine? What's up, girl? And of course, my friend Bridget, my friend Lindsay, Marissa, of course, my bestie, also. Well, I think listens to this podcast. Pretty sure she does. But here's a interesting question. Okay. And Fauci, why would you say the virus was isolated in the 80s, but it wasn't? I don't quite understand. And I love what Judy Margulies called the CDC. She called it the Center for Dishonesty and Corruption. That's what she called it. Do I agree with it? Sort of, kind of. But that's not important. But I want to get to something really ironic today and very troubling. If you have watched the latest, polls and all the Fox News and stuff like that, yesterday, Democratic Vice President Joe Biden was in Florida yesterday. And he spoke, did his little, and what I think is funny is that when he speaks, it's a very small round of people at his things. But what's troubling to me is that if you're going to lead the country, you're going to answer questions to the people that want to know the answers. Okay? And it's sad that when they ask him about what he would have done for the virus, threatens to leave. That's not what you do if you're going to run for president. You answer the questions that are given to you. You answer them off the cuff. That's what I believe. Don't use a prompter. Go off the cuff when you speak. That's the best way to speak. Like, I have scripts that I use for when I write my announcements here at the program that I do, but I never use it. I read it, but I memorize things. That's how everybody should do it. I think it would be much more transparency if you did it off the cuff, I think. When you read stuff on a script like that, or when you look down at a prompter, it doesn't look good in your record. It makes you look like you're tired. That's what I think about it. Again, I have scripts that I use to write down things for notes, but when I'm on the microphone, I don't need it. Because ad-lib. You can ad-lib things on the spot. Best way to do things if you're going to speak. Ad-lib everything. Yeah, have stuff prepared, but you don't have to read it as you're speaking because it doesn't look like you're really conveying emotion. But again, this has been podcast 71. We're hoping to get some guests on very soon, hopefully over the phone. I'm going to try and figure something out to get a toll-free number put in. I like to have a toll-free number on this thing to have some callers calling live to discuss some things. I want to have some open debates. I want to have the conversation. I want to get hard-hitting questions out. I want to have some debates with people. I think it'd be really fun to do. So, again, if you have feedback, send me an email, brian.mccauley1@gmail.com. That is brian.mccauley1@gmail.com. One more time, brian.mccauley1@gmail.com. So thank you guys, podcast 71. We'll see you guys for podcast 72 and 73 next week. Thank you guys.